Oh yay, oh yay. He says, oh yay, dirtbags! Court is now in session.
All rise. Batman Year 3 is about to begin. 2022 marks the 30th anniversary of this show. It's hard to believe that we started our look back at this series in 2020 and are already 62 episodes in to the best version of the Caped Crusader ever, Batman the Animated Series. This year, we finally start Season 2, and there's a lot to cover. Batman goes on some wild adventures, from fighting Egyptian zombie queens to self-proclaimed Greek gods. But fear not, we still have those character studies that made this series great, including the highly requested Baby Doll episode. New villains like Scarface and Bane make their debuts, and we even see the Dark Knight defend himself against all of Arkham in trial. Still using the 2018 Blu-ray collection to guide us down Batman's dark path, we'll dive into the how and why the second season rebranded the show The Adventures of Batman and Robin, complete with a brand new intro and end credits. Plus, we have access to a few commentary tracks to give us bigger insights into these installments. They feature thoughts from series co-creators Bruce Timm and Eric Radomski, writer Paul Dini, and more members of the creative team that made this show what it was. Now for 2022, we will be scaling down how many episodes we're covering. The plan is to do that just for this year. We currently have 47 of the Dark Knight's adventures to get through, so we'll be reviewing 16 this year. That's one video every other day throughout the month of May. In 2023, I fully plan on and expect to finish the remaining 31 episodes in another full schedule. In the meantime, there's much to look forward to this year. So join me once again as we take a look back at this animation touchstone piece by piece in Batman. Fire from Olympus isn't the strongest start we could have had to Batman 2022, but it is unique. Maximilian Zeus is the owner of Gotham's internationally significant Maximilian Shipping Company. Some time ago, in order to save his fledgling empire, he started carrying cargo for the mob. Eventually, the stress of the situation caused Maxie to have a psychotic break. He now lives in a fantasy world, thinking of himself as the Greek god Zeus, and conducts himself as such. After one of his employees was caught trying to pass along incriminating information to Commissioner Gordon, Maxie attacks him with an electrified staff, nearly killing him. It's soon revealed that Zeus's company has come into possession of an electron discharge cannon, a weapon created by US and European militaries, capable of firing destructive lightning. Batman goes to confront the mentally unstable CEO on the roof of his Greek temple-inspired office building, where Zeus is found to have gone fully off the deep end. But it remains to be seen if his delusions will have disastrous consequences for Gotham. While this isn't exactly an exceptional episode of this classic series, it's not bad. The steady hand of frequent director Dan Reba helmed the script written by Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens, based on a story by the one and only Paul Dini. The Reeves-Stevens pair had previously penned scripts for Dreams in Darkness and The Strange Secret of Bruce Wayne, both of which were solid installments. Fire from Olympus was the last episode they worked on for the show. The Dong Yang Animation Company put together some good-looking scenes here. A few outstanding sequences are even part of the episode, including Batman's battle with a boar and the horrific, fiery crash of one of the famous police blimps. The latter really made a strong visual impression. However, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the layout services were handled by Spectrum, who, if you didn't know by now, was responsible for some of the best animation across the whole series. Maxie Zeus is a character that was created by Denny O'Neil and Don Newton in 1979, and used here and there over the years in the Batman comic books. He has a richer backstory on those pages than he does in his one and only appearance in this series. The description of his psychotic break into insanity is only explained by his assistant/girlfriend Cleo about halfway through the episode. Unfortunately, because of this, his characterization feels a little too rushed, and we only get a small glimpse of him attempting to break through his mythological fantasy.
Cleo, I'm sorry, I can't. Thou art no longer fit to be among us!
It would have been nice to have had a scene or two featuring his real personality to create a more well-rounded villain, but I do feel like we saw this kind of thing before with Two-Face and a few others. Perhaps it was best to not repeat too many of those beats. Although I do like this line from his girlfriend Cleo, who's holding out hope that he'll come to his senses.
He's not living in the real world anymore. Maybe you can relate to that.
Got him. Spoiler warning for those who are interested in watching this one without wanting to know how it ends. By the finish of the story, Maxie is defeated, and we see a sad, sympathetic side to Zeus when he's brought into Arkham Asylum.
Now at last, mighty Zeus is home.
I think he's among the most deserving to actually be there, as it's clear he's not in control of his actions and seems to have a more believable-ish condition. As he walks to his cell, he names the other inmate patients after Greek or Roman mythological characters, bringing them into his fantasy world.
There's beautiful Demeter, goddess of the harvest, and double-faced Janus, lord of beginnings and endings, and merry Hermes, the trickster of the gods.
Earlier in the episode, he refers to Batman as Hades, which I thought was a nice touch too. I like the lightning rod staff as a weapon, but other than that, I think he's lower on the list of the show's antagonists. Maxie Zeus later showed up in episodes of both The Batman and Harley Quinn. As was the case with just about everyone else in that Harley animated series, he was highly entertaining. There are much better episodes coming up this month that I'm really looking forward to reviewing, so I hope you stay tuned. Batman Year 3 is just getting started. Here's some good stuff for you. Read My Lips introduces the ventriloquist and his dummy Scarface into the series. The distinctive execution of this episode makes it more than worthy of discussion. A new gang has recently been scoring big by robbing several high-profile institutions in Gotham. The thefts are reported to be well coordinated, and there's little to no evidence betraying the identities of the perpetrators. However, Commissioner Gordon comes into possession of a videotape depicting the thieves running from their last robbery. He gives it to Batman in hopes of the Dark Knight turning something up that the police couldn't. It turns out, Batman is able to cross-reference a tattoo on one of the gang members as he fled the latest scene. The Caped Crusader confronts the culprit, Charles Rhino Daly, and ends up tailing him to his boss's hideout. Batman is surprised to discover that the leader of the successful criminal group is a mentally disturbed ventriloquist named Arnold Wesker. But upon closer inspection, it seems that Wesker's dummy, Scarface, is the real one calling the shots. Batman begins to unravel this new criminal outfit while attempting to decipher who the real dummy is. The prolific Boyd Kirkland directed a script written by Joe R. Lansdale. Those two alone would be enough behind-the-scenes star power to make this a classic, but the story for the episode was laid out by producer Alan Burnett and series story editor Michael Reeves. In the audio commentary, Reeves mentions this is one of his personal favorites. Lansdale, Reeves, and Kirkland previously teamed up on my favorite episode of the series, Perchance to Dream. Needless to say, I was going to like Read My Lips. Lansdale only wrote one more teleplay in the form of the Jonah Hex story Showdown, and we'll get to talking about that installment of the show at the end of this year's Batman coverage. TMS was behind the animation here, and it's pretty apparent. It's not the best looking episode they were responsible for, but there's a certain level of quality to these TMS installments that always showed off a strong effort. The studio's reputation precedes itself, though. You don't need me to tell you that. Shirley Walker did the music herself. There's a strong jazz influence that we heard before and would hear again, but it's appropriate for the aesthetic of Read My Lips. I especially liked when the Batman theme was played in this style. Walker mentioned in the commentary track that some of this score was also a little bit of an homage to the Adam West Batman show. Credit needs to be given to the voice cast here. Of course, all the regulars are great as usual, but there are a few other standouts. Earl Bowen is a pretty well-known actor for on-screen roles in movies like The Terminator and such, but he had a big voice acting career in some other recognizable projects. Here, he makes one of 2 appearances as Scarface's heavy, Rhino.
He's just tired, irritable. He's really a genius, Scarface is.
Most impressive, though, is George Zunza. He voiced both the ventriloquist and Scarface, showing off a wide range in his line readings.
Hey, who's making all the racket? That you, dummy?
Oh no! Don't let him find me with you!
It's just a nice detail to learn that both voices are actually done by the same guy, adding some authenticity to the performance and character. Zunza played a few other roles across the DCAU, including the similar-sounding G. Carl Francis from the seminal installment The Laughing Fish.
He's crazy.
As explained in the audio commentary, series co-creator Bruce Timm recalls having some pushback from DC Comics about the ventriloquist Scarface portrayal.
Now, we did actually have a debate with DC Comics about Scarface, because the gag in the comics is that the ventriloquist himself is not a very good ventriloquist, and he sounds as if he's talking with his mouth closed.
Yeah, he can't pronounce the labials.
He can't. We didn't really kind of want to do that. We just thought it would be a little bit intrusive. So we thought it would really hamper George's performance.
The relationship between the ventriloquist and Scarface in the comics is quite different. I mean, the ventriloquist really doesn't like Scarface that much.
Personally, I liked the almost supernatural way Scarface is pulled off here. And the tone BTAS lived in, Wesker being an amazing ventriloquist works better than portraying him as a bad one. The multiple personality syndrome disorder they used to explain the 2 personas in one body was believable enough to get by, too.
2 personalities in one brain, completely separate. Neither one knows what the other is thinking.
Spoilers ahead for the climax and ending. Batman is lured into a trap when he outsmarts Scarface by turning his 2 personalities against each other. Eventually, Bats escapes his predicament, the dummy is accidentally shot up by a machine gun, and Wesker is sent to Arkham. The finishing scene at the asylum is possibly the best thing about the whole episode.
The medication has helped him immensely. His other personality seems to have totally submerged.
That's very good work.
Thank you.
Great dark ending there. I loved how they teased more stories with the character, and the image of the ventriloquist scarring a new Scarface facade is a striking one. Read My Lips is a definite recommendation from yours truly. It has great writing, animation, voice acting, and more. Some other tidbits I liked were the newspaper montage mentioning a Gotham Square Garden, recently shown in The Batman, Batman's detective work, and Bruce's old skills he learned under Zatara coming into play to defeat his latest enemy.
You're going up the river, Sawdust, for brains?
Why, I oughta...
You may not be able to read my lips, but listen to these words. Check this one out where and when you can.
I didn't say that. My lips didn't move.
So what? You're a ventriloquist! The Worrymen is kind of the finale to Season 1, but also kind of not. It's a bit confusing, honestly. On HBO Max, it's listed as the last episode of the first season, hitting TV screens on September 16th, 1993. In terms of air date order, though, Paging the Crime Doctor actually finished off the show's first run, being broadcast the following day. In production order, The Worrymen is the last of the 65 episodes originally produced before the Fox network ordered 20 more.
Look, it's all a bit technical, but...
For our purposes, since we've been doing these in production order from the beginning and following the Blu-ray set, we'll just call it the finale of Season 1. Now let's talk about the episode. Bruce Wayne's old pal Veronica Vreeland is back. This time, she's just returned from Central America and brought with her miniature dolls she purchased called Worrymen. Legends say you tell them your problems, then put them under your pillow at night. They're supposed to do the worrying for you while you sleep.
And when you wake up, poof, your problems are gone.
As she tries to convince her rich friends to take a few of the figurines, a mysterious interloper is spotted by Wayne, who confronts the figure on the roof as Batman. But causing a potentially deadly distraction at the party allows the figure to escape. When back at Wayne Manor, Alfred places one of the worrymen Bruce received at the bash under his pillow in muted hopes of Master Wayne actually getting a good night's rest for once. In the morning, Bruce starts acting strangely. He informs his secretary to place $20 million into his suitcase, which he leaves on the ledge outside his office window. Having no memory of his instructions, he snaps out of it just in time to see a similar-looking individual from Veronica's party snatch up the cash and flee. Comparable incidents have apparently been happening to many attendees of Vreeland's get-together. When Batman goes to try and get answers from Veronica, he finds her about to commit the same mistake. After he stops her, he's attacked by 3 men wearing the same garb as the thief from Wayne Enterprises, leading the Dark Knight to dig deeper into who is really behind what's been going on. Frank Parr was back directing another Veronica Vreeland story after her first appearance in maybe the best Penguin episode of the show, Birds of a Feather. The script was written by Paul Dini, not sharing credit this time. There's nothing too special about the writing or direction here until the climax, which gives us an interesting location and antagonistic elements to play with. All the regular voice actors were solid per the usual. In a small role, LeVar Burton lends his talents to the character of Hayden Sloane.
Seems all I do is worry about how to get my company through one more day.
That was a nice surprise. We often saw recognizable names show up in the credits, and while this wasn't a major part, it was just cool to hear Geordie LaForge in Batman the Animated Series. It's too bad this was his only role in the DCAU. Dong Ying animated this episode with the layouts once again done by Spectrum. There are a couple spots in here where the fluidity of the animation looks top-notch, but there's also a spot that looked weirdly out of place. To talk about that, we have to spoil the reveal of the villain, so if you want to watch this first without knowing, now's your chance to tune out. The Worrymen are eventually found to have hidden microchips in them for the purpose of mind control.
And who knows how to warp the human mind better than Jervis Tetch, the Mad Hatter?
A personal favorite bad guy of mine, the Mad Hatter is tracked down by Batman to the Great Eastern Costume Company. The odd animation spot happens when the Hatter is explaining his plans to the Caped Crusader. I can't say it's poorly animated because that's not the case. It seems like there was too much line movement going on. Maybe too many frames being jammed into that one shot for some reason. I'm not sure exactly why it looks that way, but it's sort of the equivalent of turning on motion blur on your HD TV or watching footage in 60 frames per second. Not a big deal, and it didn't affect my enjoyment of the episode, just a quirk that was hard to miss. Roddy McDowall nails his performance as the Mad Hatter again. That was just perfect casting and a major reason why I grew to love this character.
After my recent release from Arkham, I vowed to leave Gotham and my wicked ways behind me.
It's those little eccentric nuances, like how he pronounced Arkham, that made his line readings distinctive and engaging. The costume company building ended up being a visually compelling spot for the climax. They brought in effigies of Batman's greatest villains for him to fight or just be there for unsettling ambience. This included Penguin, Riddler, a life-size marionette of Harley Quinn, and a giant Jack-in-the-Box Joker. Check this out. Great moment there. As to why an abandoned costume company would have dummies of Batman's villains, I don't know. Maybe Hatter made them to screw with the world's greatest detective, but in any case, it was a good idea from Dini to incorporate them. Ultimately, it's revealed that Mad Hatter was the man who sold the Worrymen to Vreeland in the first place, after taking control of the local Jaguar shaman and later low-level henchmen to do his bidding. He was trying to get as much money as possible to buy an island and leave Gotham and crime behind forever. Batman's almost decapitated by a guillotine in an exciting sequence that ends with Gotham's protector freeing Hatter's henchmen from his control. Tetch is then fooled by a Batman dummy as the real deal delivers the final blow. Wrapping things up, all the stolen money was returned and the shaman left Tetch with a souvenir to haunt his dreams, that being a Worryman in the likeness of Batman. We see Jervis Tetch in Arkham tossing and turning as the episode ends. Nothing is going to top Perchance to Dream in terms of a Mad Hatter story, but this was pretty decent. After dragging for the first half, it really picks up on the back end and delivers another worthy tale featuring this villain. It's also significant as the last episode produced before the creative team went to work on the second batch of episodes. So set your worries aside and give this a watch or rewatch. Sideshow is the first episode that was produced for Batman the Animated Series Season 2. While it was the second episode to air, dated May 3rd, 1994, it has the distinction of being the season premiere on the Blu-ray set. I know Mask of the Phantasm came out in December of '93, in between seasons 1 and 2, but we will discuss that film in full detail at a later date. Ruled sane and guilty of his crimes, Killer Croc is being transported by train to a prison outside of Gotham. In the middle of the ride, Croc uses his jaws to break his chains and escape the locomotive, but not before being shot with a tranquilizer dart. Luckily, Batman is on board under the disguise of a reporter and faces off against the criminal on top of the moving train cars. After a brief battle, they fall into the rocky wilderness where Croc flees from the Dark Knight while suffering the effects of the sedative in his system. Eventually, he gives Batman the slip, but groggily trips into a river and down a waterfall. Unconscious under the rapids, he's saved by a boy with flippers for hands and feet named Billy and brought back to a remote property owned by a small group of retired circus performers. While in their care, Croc is treated as one of their own. But with Batman still out there looking for him, the fugitive juggles with what his next move will be. The episode was loosely based on a story in Detective Comics number 410 from 1971 called A Vow from the Grave. That issue was written and drawn by the legendary team of Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams. Sideshow isn't an exact copy and really only uses the setting and a few characters from the comic prominently. Killer Croc isn't even in the book at all. However, the character known as Billy in the episode became a recurring player in the comics. There, he's known as Eddie Deacon, aka Flippy, and he's appeared in DCU stories as recently as the 2010s. Sideshow was directed by Boyd Kirkland, a good choice for the beginning of a new set of episodes. The story credit went to Michael Reeves, and the teleplay was also written by Reeves and the returning Bryn Stevens. Reeves was often involved in some high-quality scripts for this show, and I've sung Stevens' praises on more than one occasion. She only wrote 5 episodes, but with Heart of Steel and Birds of a Feather already in her rear view at this point, Sideshow was yet another impressive installment to add to her credentials. Once again, the animation services were provided by the Dong Yang Company, with the layouts performed by Spectrum. Unfortunately, this was the last episode that Spectrum had any involvement in. While they did work on Mask of the Phantasm just before this, they closed their doors for good soon after. Their legacy is well preserved through Heart of Ice, Beware the Grey Ghost, On Leather Wings, and a few other classics. They were responsible for some of the best animation the series ever saw, and their work is finally remembered among fans and the crew of Batman the Animated Series. Sideshow is a pretty nice looking episode. It all takes place outside of Gotham in mostly brightly lit outdoor areas. While it is a bit of a shock to the system to see an entire story play out without Gotham's shadowy embrace, it turned out to be a welcomed change of visual pace, and it stands out for that reason among others. One of my favorite sequences sees Batman falling down a massive canyon. He loses his grappling hook among the plummeting tree and boulders, leaving him clinging to a ledge. A good-looking and exciting piece of animation. Of course, there are a few mistakes, like Killer Croc's eyes changing colors a few times, but it's forgivable. Now, before I get into what I thought of Croc's characterization here, I need to address this.
I threw a rock at him. It was a big rock.
Flawless. So there's actually a lot of heart in this story, and to take a character like Croc and almost give him a conscience is no easy task. We've heard from other creators on this show that Bryn Stevens was known for that kind of thing in her scripts, so I think it's fair to give some of that credit to her. Croc never really changes his personality, but you can see sympathy starting to creep in, especially when talking to Billy. There's a moment in the middle of the night where he's about to steal the group's nest egg of $50,000, but starts to feel bad about it before he's spotted by the kid.
I know you feel a little funny being here, but it's great. It really is. You can be yourself.
Yeah, great. Whatever.
It's fairly clear that no one's ever been nice to Croc before, and he doesn't know how to handle it. Was the Killer Croc character beyond redemption? Could he have changed? Particularly considering he was around people who were comparably ridiculed, who knows how things would have gone down if Batman never found him. Spoilers ahead for the finish of the episode. After Croc is shown being paranoid of the Bat showing up a few times, the vigilante does end up tracking down the criminal. The resulting fight sees Batman thrown in a cage as he tries to convince the circus performers of the killer's true nature. After he tries murdering Batman, Croc's newfound friends turn on him, and he's forced to lock them in a separate cage. Soon enough, it becomes an all-out battle to apprehend Croc, which finishes after the fugitive is knocked out on the mill wheel. Authorities arrive sometime later and lock the criminal in a straitjacket and mask, preventing him from using his jaws. One last conversation with Billy reminds us of what could have been.
Why, Croc? Why'd you turn on us like that? We could have helped you.
You said you can be yourself out here, remember? I guess that's what I was doing. Being myself.
This was really good, and a surprising, nearly sympathetic turn from Killer Croc. Aaron Kincaid did a solid job with the dialogue. Just a hint of the character questioning himself is all that was needed. Also, we got this moment that made me like everything more.
Give it up, Bats! You can't take me! I got the high ground!
It's over, Anakin!
I can't finish this video without making a quick mention of Brad Garrett as Goliath.
And I'm Goliath. I helped haul you in.
It was his only appearance in this show, but he would go on to voice a few characters, most notably Lobo, on Superman the Animated Series and one episode of Justice League. Other than that, I'll just say this was a very strong, very different episode for Croc and the series as a whole. Loved the setting and climax, but my favorite thing about it was the character work. Make Sideshow your main attraction next time you want to watch a story featuring Batman's reptilian nemesis. A bullet for Bullock is significant for a handful of details within it, not the least of which is the story, focusing on everyone's favorite ornery Gotham City cop. Detective Harvey Bullock is in trouble. He's been receiving threatening letters in addition to attempts on his life while off duty a few times over the last few weeks. Not wanting to alert the department and internal affairs because of his less than stellar record, he goes to an unlikely ally for help: Batman. Together, they investigate the long list of suspects who would have it out for Bullock. This leads the Dark Knight to a recently released criminal who Bullock put away years ago. Vinny the Shark Starkey is back on the streets, and the improbable duo search the city for him. However, Bullock has made more enemies than even he realizes, as all may not be as it seems. Frank Parr directed this episode, written by Michael Reeves. However, it's very closely based on the identically named story in Detective Comics number 651 from 1992. Chuck Dixon, co-creator of Bane, wrote that issue, and nearly all the beats happen the same way. This includes lines of dialogue directly from the book, so credit to Dixon for creating the story that this episode adapted. In the production order, this is the first episode that featured the Adventures of Batman and Robin intro. In the second season, the Fox network wanted Robin more involved, so the name of the show was changed to accompany this new intro, featuring the dynamic duo more prominently. Gone was the dark and moody, pretty much perfect original opening set to the tune of Danny Elfman's Batman movie theme. And instead, we get a collection of clips cut together with Shirley Walker's animated Batman theme attached. It's not the worst thing ever, and Walker's Batman theme is my favorite of any The Dark Knight has ever had, but this cut of it isn't the strongest I've ever heard. Something is definitely lost with a more basic introduction like this. Transitioning from here to the still intact trademark title cards felt kind of jarring. For whatever reason, the ending credits on the Blu-ray feature the original backdrop of Batman Solo with the movie theme blaring underneath. The DVD version has the original opening and closing credits too. Kind of strange considering on HBO Max we get the, what was then, new end credits with Batman and Robin's silhouettes in the background as another Shirley Walker music composition plays. I actually prefer this cut of the animated Batman theme well over what they used in the intro. While this is, again, the first in the production order to use the Adventures of Batman and Robin opening, A Bullet for Bullock was actually the second to last episode aired of the second season, hitting TV sets on September 14th, 1995. The first time viewers saw the new look and title of the series was on the episode titled Bane, which we'll cover later this month. The music for A Bullet for Bullock was composed by Harvey Cohen under Shirley Walker's supervision. It won a Daytime Emmy Award in 1996 in the category of Outstanding Music Direction and Composition. This is another one of those jazzy, old detective noir type scores that we saw pop up on the show from time to time. Since this was a legit mystery story, they seemed to play up this soundtrack style a little more than usual. There's just more substance to it. I'll admit it is really fun to listen to while not overpowering the action on screen. It's not like that the entire time, but when the music switches over to that style, it definitely upped the cool factor. When there's a signature score like this one attached to an episode, they'd usually release it on one of the volumes that collected the show's music. Surprisingly, A Bullet for Bullock soundtrack is nowhere to be found and has never been released, despite it winning an Emmy Award. I'm not sure if that's because of some complicated rights issue or they just didn't think it would fit onto one of the volumes, but it is peculiar. Studio Junio provided the animation services. They only worked on 6 other episodes that included Mudslide, Blind as a Bat, and the very well done Dreams in Darkness. This one here is a decent enough looking installment of the series. It's a touch inconsistent at points, but has some great visuals throughout. Batman and Bullock make for a good odd couple pairing. This series made it abundantly clear that Harvey hates Batman, and we saw the two clash at certain points leading up to this. But A Bullet for Bullock shaded in their relationship a bit. Batman doesn't hesitate to help the detective when he comes to him with his problem. However, there's definitely no love lost.
Are you on the take?
Watch it, freak! I never took a dime from nobody. I just bend the rules a little sometimes. We're not all that different.
We're on the same side, but we're not the same.
Nobody tells me how to conduct an investigation.
Do you want to live, Bullock?
Their interactions are some of the best we've seen thus far into the show. They just have a particular chemistry that's very unique, so it's fun to watch them go back and forth. The other supporting players like Renee Montoya, Summer Gleason, and Vinny the Shark also serve their respective purposes well. Spoilers for the big reveal of Bullock's tormentor. After Bats and Bullock take down another illegal operation headed by Starkey, Vinny vehemently denies his involvement in the attempts on the detective's life. Bullock may have thought he had his man, but the Caped Crusader wasn't so sure. His suspicions are confirmed that night when Harvey is held at gunpoint outside his apartment building. The nervous, masked assailant is quickly taken down by an onlooking Batman and revealed to be Bullock's landlord, Nivens. We saw him in a scene earlier in the episode where he berated Harvey for being a horrible tenant. He had had enough of the crass, loud, and obnoxious cop and would do anything to get rid of him. Pushed over the edge by Bullock not taking the hint, Nivens was about to finish him off once and for all. Giving the landlord some extra motivation was the fact that once Bullock moved out, he could rent his apartment for a substantially more amount of money. Harvey is shocked by the revelation, almost to the point that it's suggested he'll start treating those around him a little better. But with his personality the way it is, that was unlikely to actually happen. A Bullet for Bullock is absolutely worth a watch or rewatch. If you're a fan of this character, it's one of his better episodes. But with the Emmy-winning music, fun story, and strong vocal performances, there are a myriad of things to like about it. Trial is a great idea for an episode. You could probably even stretch this premise into a movie. Well, according to a few places online, that actually was the case at one point. This was going to be the first Batman animated series feature, until the producers changed their minds and went with Mask of the Phantasm instead. I've seen this mentioned a lot wherever this episode is brought up, but I couldn't find the source interview or quotes that started the story, so we'll just have to call this a rumor. I will say, though, it does make some sense. Janet Van Dorn is the successor to Harvey Dent as Gotham's district attorney. Recently, she's been pushing hard to prosecute Batman for creating the very villains he brings in. She later has a dinner date with Bruce Wayne where they further debate the Batman's place in Gotham, but soon after she excuses herself from the table, Janet is abducted. Commissioner Gordon calls the Dark Knight to Police HQ, where he shows him an ominous letter that arrived with Van Dorn's glasses case. Batman is summoned by the note to the Gotham courthouse in order to save the DA. But when he arrives, he's jumped by Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn, who knock him out with one of Ivy's barbs and take him to Arkham, where the lunatics are now running the asylum. The Mad Hatter's technology has rendered the staff hapless fools and enabled the building to be overtaken by its prisoners. It's soon made clear what's going on. The inmates at Arkham are putting Batman on trial. The Joker is the judge, Two-Face the prosecutor, and a roster of Batman's most dangerous villains sit on the jury. They echo Van Dorn's claim and accuse the Caped Crusader of making them the twisted souls they are now. The villains assign Van Dorn as Batman's defense lawyer, and the trial plays out in front of Arkham's unstable population. If Van Dorn can clear Batman of the charges, she'll go free. If not, she'll go down with him. The premise of Trial reminds me a bit of that part in The Dark Knight Rises where the Scarecrow becomes the judge in a court set up by Bane after he took over Gotham.
Death! By exile.
They brought the big guns out for this one, as Bruce Timm and Paul Dini are credited with the story. Dini wrote the teleplay himself, and Dan Reba directed this fan favorite. Having Timm and Dini collaborating on the story lends more credence to the idea that this was originally meant to be a bigger project. Even though a concept this large in scale with so many characters thrown in might feel rushed in the 22-minute format, the Batman team pulled it off flawlessly. The plot is introduced quickly, but it doesn't seem like we're missing much of anything. Almost all of Batman's big villains get at least a few seconds to shine.
Hang him!
Shoot him!
Hit him with a rock!
Alluding back to some of their origins resulted in a few nice callbacks.
You brainwashed and kidnapped a woman who rejected you.
He was going to take her away from me. I had no choice.
You could have respected her wishes and left her alone.
I'd have killed her first! Oh, I'd like that last statement stricken from the record, please.
Record? Is someone supposed to be writing this down?
He should have let me bump off Harvey Dent. We'd all have been better off. Wouldn't we, Harv?
Sad, isn't it? Harleen Quinzel was a doctor here at Arkham until the Joker twisted her mind.
This was actually the first time Harley's origin as a psychiatrist in Arkham was mentioned in the series. We got the full story in the new Batman Adventures episode, Mad Love, that was translated from the comic of the same name by Dini and Timm. Throwing in a taste of that here made Harley's backstory infinitely more interesting. Through questioning Batman's rogues gallery, Van Dorn ends up regretting her previous opinion. She discovers that all of Arkham's most dangerous criminals would have likely turned out the way they are without Batman's involvement. She makes such a good case of this that she actually convinces the jury to find Batman not guilty. However, the bad guys still attempt to kill her and the Dark Knight anyway. Before that, they gather around in a separate room to unmask the vigilante. But Van Dorn saves the day by knocking out a light with a batarang that she had on her from earlier.
Don't let him get away!
Who says I'm leaving?
In the darkness, Batman intimidates and KOs a few villains before fleeing with Van Dorn. The police finally arrive thanks to a tracking device left by the Caped Crusader, and the day is saved.
I see now there's a need for the things you do, but I'm still going to work toward a city that doesn't need Batman.
Me too.
It's too bad that this was the last appearance of Janet Van Dorn, because I thought she really worked here. The character only made one other appearance prior to Trial in Season 1's Shadow of the Bat Part 1. For that episode, she was voiced by Lynette Medi, but here, she's played by Stephanie Zimbalist. Zimbalist is actually the daughter of the voice of Alfred, Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., and apparently met Kevin Conroy when they both attended Juilliard. That last part could be just a rumor, but it's good to hear that this casting was all in the Bat family. I really like Trial. It's a must-see installment of the series, and even if you've watched it before, it's fun to go back and see all those villains interact with each other in the same episode. It's not quite Almost Got Him, but it works for what it is. My verdict? Guilty of being a classic.
That's all, folks.
Avatar sees the return of Ra's al Ghul to Batman the Animated Series. After his not-so-fatal fall into the giant Lazarus pit at the end of the Demon's Quest two-parter, he returns here to lead Batman on another globe-trotting adventure to chase after yet another chance at immortality. In 1898 Egypt, an expedition led by an unnamed explorer has discovered a tomb underground. The explorer is lowered inside the ancient resting place and met by a blinding green light, which he approaches. Above, the rope his fellow excavators tied to his harness is uncontrollably yanked deeper and deeper underground until they see that it's been broken and burned. They all proceed to flee in terror. In present day, Bruce Wayne has funded a Treasures of the Pharaohs exhibit at one of Gotham's museums. The night before the opening, a masked figure breaks in to steal the Scroll of Osiris, the oldest Egyptian document known to man. Batman shows up to stop him, revealing the masked man to be Ra's al Ghul's bodyguard, Ubu. But before he knew what hit him, Ra's himself enters and throws an Egyptian cobra at the Dark Knight, which bites and injects him with deadly venom. Thanks to an antidote on his utility belt, Batman survives the encounter and flies to Gibraltar with the aim of enlisting the help of Ra's daughter, Talia. Together, they look for Ra's in Egypt and eventually discover he's searching for Thoth Khepera, an ancient queen of 2 continents who ruled for 1,000 years with the power of life and death itself in her grasp. They chase Ra's and his group to the same tomb seen earlier in the flashback, but what awaits there is something not even the great Ra's al Ghul could fathom. Kevin Altieri was back to direct this one after helming Ra's al Ghul's original appearances in Off Balance and The Demon's Quest Parts 1 and 2. Altieri also directed the character in his final appearance on the show. That episode, Showdown, is the last one on the docket that we'll be talking about this month. I guess Kevin had dibs on Ra's, since he was the only person who directed any installment the character was in until the leader of the Society of Shadows re-emerged on Superman, the Animated Series. In his 4th writing credit that we're covering this month already, Michael Reeves wrote this story himself, and I will say, it's a darn good one. Like the previous Ra's al Ghul episodes in the show, Avatar has a very Indiana Jones-style feel. Reeves' cinematic influences may not be indie alone, though. We'll talk about that in a minute. I think we have to give the spoiler warning early here because there's a lot to talk about that's going to give away the ending and little bits along the way. Avatar has my seal of approval several times over, so check it out if you haven't ever seen it. I'd recommend watching it before hearing my thoughts on everything. Bruce and Talia eventually do meet Ra's and his men in the tomb, but they're held at gunpoint after the small group gets the jump on them. Thoth Khepera's sarcophagus is open to reveal a set of scrolls that Ra's thinks holds the key to true immortality. However, they crumble from age in his hands. A hidden switch is then accidentally discovered that reveals a staircase leading further underground. Ra's descends the steps to discover a Lazarus pit surrounded by skeletons. The legendary queen then rises from the liquid.
I am Thoth Khepera. Those who have joined me share their knowledge with me. We are legion.
She implores Ra's to join her, and soon, Khepera's terrifying true form is revealed. She's consuming Ra's life force, turning him elderly when Talia and Batman break up the ritual. Thoth summons the soul she's consumed out of the Lazarus pit, and they form tentacles to kill the intruders. Batman ends up throwing a grenade Khepera's way, but it does no damage. Ra's, Talia, and Batman then book it out of there. The Dark Knight stays behind long enough to knock over a statue in the hopes of stopping the Queen for good, as the whole tomb starts to break apart. Everyone there escapes just in time to see Ra's youth, if you want to call it that, restored. Batman and Talia lead the criminals away on horseback before Talia, feeling guilty about her father, turns on Bruce in order to free Ra's and his men. They leave Batman in the desert with a lone canteen of water and pace off as the episode closes. Studio Junio animated Avatar, and it looks really great. The climax in particular is done especially well. There's a richness to the movement in that sequence that's epitomized in the big moments and small details equally. The storyboard for that section was drawn by Bruce Timm, and a portion of it was made available in the book Batman Animated. The energy pops off the page even in those drawings, so it's no surprise it worked so well in the actual episode. I'm sure I've mentioned this before, but if you're a big fan of this show and you can get your hands on that book, I'd heavily recommend it. There are so many great passages in there, from character bios to behind-the-scenes tidbits and more. It's also co-written by Paul Dini. That's enough of a reason right there. Thoth Capera herself has a wonderfully twisted design, and how she's used in her screen time didn't waste a frame. Everything in the Lazarus Pit under the tomb looks badass, from how she moves to the details that line the peripherals. Having all those skeletons from different historical eras surround the pit is a perfectly ominous visual. This kind of heavy detail goes all the way back to the title card. At first glance, it's rather plain looking, but gets the point across. If you look closer, you can see Ra's face to face with Thoth, Batman's eyes and ears, and the several more obvious Bat logos posing as hieroglyphics. So cool. The character work accomplished with Talia and Ra's in this episode was very strong. She legitimately didn't know her father had returned and felt betrayed by that fact. In turn, Ra's feels similarly betrayed by his daughter's actions at the end of the Demon's Quest story. When Talia has her change of heart and turns on Bruce in order to set her father free, she may have been trying to get back in his good graces after hearing this comment earlier.
It is said that one finds immortality in one's offspring. Alas, I know that to be a lie.
That was freaking cold. Usually there's some chicanery going on with this family, and you can't trust the negative things they say to each other, but as evidenced by Talia's last-minute heel turn, this was a legit insult, and it hit its target hard. Talia is torn between Bruce, a man she truly loves, and her own father. You almost can't blame her for the ending. Except I can, because she left Batman alone in the desert. Surprisingly, Ubu was the only one who cared enough to throw the guy some water. That whole situation is kind of hilarious, by the way. What if you just happened upon a fully costumed Batman in the middle of an Egyptian desert? We never find out how he got back to civilization, but it's just funny to ponder. There are a couple other moments like that in the episode too, like how Bruce is apparently expecting an Egyptian cobra to bite him since he's carrying that specific antidote on his belt, or the James Bond-style trap of dropping a giant glass box on Bruce and Talia out of nowhere, or the fact that disintegrating ancient papers seem to be some of Batman's enemies' greatest weakness. Kyodai Ken says hello.
Mazui.
Bruce breaks out a few different outfits here and leaves the brown and yellow suit combo in the closet. This isn't completely unheard of, but it is rare for this series. After rocking a gray and pink ensemble in the opening sequence, Wayne dresses as an inverted Indiana Jones once he gets to Gibraltar. That follows the obvious and appreciated travel sequence homage to the same character. The illusions don't stop there. In order to defeat Thoth Capera and destroy/trap her in her pit, Batman pushes over a massive statue with his legs. Sound familiar? I love seeing that kind of stuff woven in. Also, this one may not have been intentional, but when Ra's is first seduced by Thoth Capera, she of course appears as this beautiful apparition. But when Ra's joins her in the pit and kisses her, we get a tease that all is not as it seems. Then a few seconds later... Love that part. This whole little sequence reminded me of that scene in The Shining where Jack enters room 237 to see a beautiful young woman who similarly seduces him and ends up being not young. The fact that they got away with these kind of visuals in an animated Batman show is admirable. They didn't pull any punches with making this villain even more ancient, threatening, and frightening than Ra's. Very well done stuff. One thing I was a bit confused by was the flashback at the beginning. While it's a great aesthetic choice to let the visuals and music alone tell the story without other sounds, I could have sworn the explorer who enters the tomb was a young Ra's al Ghul. I guess that doesn't make sense because he seems to be consumed by Thoth Capera, but man, does it look like him. Down to a less exaggerated version of his hair shape, a similar facial structure, and blue eyes. Maybe that was just done as visual foreshadowing since Ra's says he's been obsessed with finding the Queen for 500 years. Or perhaps it's another one of Ra's offsprings. We know he had at least 2, but there had to have been more over the centuries, right? I'm probably making something out of nothing, but this was interesting to think about. Avatar is frickin' awesome. I loved this. If there's one thing I'd nitpick it for, it's that we didn't need another Lazarus Pit as the source of Thoth's power. It would have been cool to see something different and unfamiliar responsible for the otherworldly entity, but that's a minuscule complaint. Whenever we got a chance to have a story outside of Gotham and it was done this well, we couldn't lose. From the visual detail to the top-notch characterization and sci-fi horror adventure elements, this episode is a high-quality, unique tale for our Caped Crusader. Go watch it and bask in its depraved, majestic glory.
None may defile me and live.
House and Garden is a messed up episode. We just talked about how far the series went with the horror elements in Avatar, but this is a whole different level of twisted. In addition to that, there's a fun little epilogue to this story that I didn't know about previously, which we'll talk about at the end. After a few vicious attacks on wealthy single men that leave them robbed and poisoned with a plant-based toxin, Batman logically suspects Poison Ivy is back to her old tricks. But when he and Commissioner Gordon visit the now former Miss Isley, the Dark Knight discovers that she was declared legally sane months ago, and even married one of the doctors at Arkham. Mrs. Pamela Lillian Carlyle lives the life of a suburban mom to her husband's 2 boys, Chris and Kelly. Shocked at the former criminal's turnaround, Batman starts to believe she may have actually turned over a new leaf, but for some reason, he can't shake the feeling that something is off about Pam's perfect life. Meanwhile, at Gotham State University, Dick Grayson is KO'd and kidnapped by the same culprit who's been on the attack lately. The monster threatens to kill the young man if Bruce Wayne doesn't deliver $5 million in cash to the docks the following evening. Little does Batman know that at the center of all these events is something truly horrific. House and Garden was the first episode to air for the show's second season. Debuting on May 2nd, 1994, it rang in the final 20 installments of the series before the new Batman adventures revamped everything in 1997. I know it can be confusing since Batman is following the preferred production order, which lines things up better for continuity, so I hope I'm not confusing anyone out there. In the production order, this was the 5th episode produced for Season 2. Boyd Kirkland directed a story written by Paul Dini. We know Dini and Bruce Timm are fans of Poison Ivy, so I'm not surprised they gave her an episode like this one. It humanizes her while also making the character even more iniquitous. Kirkland directed other Ivy installments that Dini had a hand in writing, like her debut in Pretty Poison, and of course, the famous Harley and Ivy. But this just seemed to be the next step in her increasingly dark evolution on Batman the Animated Series. The creature that is kept in shadow for most of the first chunk of this episode finally speaks when it attacks Bruce Wayne in his car.
I do the talking. Bring $5 million in cash to the docks tomorrow midnight.
That's the familiar voice of Jim Cummings making his last BTAS appearance. He also voiced Saunders, the guy who gets attacked at the beginning.
Hey! Who's in here?
Cummings is well known for his legendary voice acting career, but he only has a handful of DCAU credits. We previously heard him in Be a Clown, and more prominently in Tiger Tiger. He'd later pop up in an episode of Superman, the Animated Series. So Batman is out in the middle of the day for a lot of this story. Hanging out in a tree with binoculars, perched on top of a town hall. He even walks up to Poison Ivy's house with Commissioner Gordon like he's just a regular guy. It's very strange to watch this suburbia Batman spying on Ivy. We've seen him in other strange places in that suit, but nothing may be odder than seeing the Dark Knight sneaking around a small neighborhood on a school day. The binocular thing in the tree is especially weird.
He's a peeping Tom.
In contrast to this, we get to see Bruce in a great-looking scene where he's dressed in a fedora and overcoat. Guy almost looks like the spirit in the middle of that fog as he meets the creature who abducted Grayson. It's just funny how Bruce appears more intimidating than Batman in this episode. Spoilers for the rest of the story. Bruce is able to retrieve Grayson from the plant creature and, through Robin, finds out that Pamela's new husband, Dr. Carlisle, does not have primary custody of his kids. In fact, his children, Chris and Kelly, are girls, not boys. Bats immediately speeds over to the Carlisle's house where the dynamic duo discover a hidden basement in the greenhouse. Odd-looking plants and scientific equipment take up the space, and soon they find Dr. Carlisle being kept alive in a vat of liquid. He tells them Pamela isn't who she seems when Batman hears a noise. He then spots plant-human babies breaking out of their biopods. In her classic costume, Poison Ivy shows up and admits that the version of Dr. Carlisle Batman saw earlier, in addition to his two children, are actually plant-based life forms enhanced with Carlisle's DNA. Really, they're sort of plant clones of the Doctor. They're also not truly human and only live for a few days at a time. Their final mutation is that of the plant creature that was responsible for the previous assaults. A group of the monsters then attack our heroes as they escape the basement with the Doctor. In the greenhouse above, Batman turns on the overhead sprinklers, which disintegrates the plant-human hybrids. He pumped the water tank with herbicide earlier, which seemed to do the trick. Ivy, now caught, admits that while she wasn't able to create female copies with Carlisle's DNA, she was able to duplicate herself. To the surprise of Batman, she then starts to melt away like the other creatures. The real Poison Ivy is shown on a plane, already a few steps ahead. She peers down at a scrapbook and begins to cry over the picture of her artificially generated family as we fade to black. In the video commentary for this episode, Paul Dini confirms he was influenced a bit by Invasion of the Body Snatchers. That's plain to see, but once again, I'm taken aback by how much they were able to get away with back in the 90s. The crew often said that Fox Kids didn't restrict them too much on what they wanted to show, only pushing back hard a few times. This here was just so screwed up, in a good way for the story, I mean. Ivy creating her own life is both uncannily terrifying and sad. She confides to Batman early on in the story that she can't conceive because of her mutations. However, she desperately wanted a family.
I meant it when I said I wanted a family that loves me. I just wanted it on my terms.
Lady, you're nuts.
While her plan is twisted as hell, you still feel sympathy for Pamela. Batman almost takes pity on her in his ending narration, as we watch Isley tear up over the people she's lost, all her missed chances at being happy.
Ivy lost everything she had, everything she said she ever wanted. For what it's worth, I believed her when she told me for the first time in her life she was happy.
This is a very effective way to shade in a villain we can empathize with, and those are usually the best kind. We relate to their wants and needs through their trauma or sorrow, but oppose their actions. Interestingly, there's a 4-page story in the back of Batman Adventures Volume 2, number 16 from 2004 that plainly spells out this was the last time we saw the real Poison Ivy in Batman the Animated Series continuity. The redesigned version we later met in the new Batman Adventures was a vegetable creature in human shape, meant to keep Batman off Ivy's tail as she went off the grid for good. What's awesome about this little story is that Ivy eventually formed a relationship with a pre-Swamp Thing Alec Holland. I love that idea. The relationship I'm talking about. Not sure about the twist of having the real Ivy not involved in further stories within the DCAU. I haven't read nearly enough of the Batman Adventures comic series, so I don't know what's canon and what's not from those books. I'll just consider it a really cool alternate take on the character's journey. House and Garden is for sure worth seeing or seeing again. It's simultaneously Poison Ivy at her most immoral and her most sympathetic. Find it, watch it, enjoy it.
Mommy.
No.
Back in 2004, Bruce Timm called The Terrible Trio the all-time worst DCAU episode ever made. After rewatching it, I can see why. Warren Lawford, Armand Lydecker, and Gunther Hardwick are three rich heirs to individual family fortunes who think they've conquered every challenge money can buy, so they seek out a new thrill by becoming a trio of masked criminals just for the sport of it. When Batman and Robin bust in on their latest heist, they set off an explosive that breaks Robin's arm and secures their getaway. Later, at a Wayne Enterprises charity event, Lawford's girlfriend, Rebecca, is concerned about how much of her wealthy father's money she spent on her last shopping spree. Warren covers the cost, but tells his two friends Rebecca's dad, Sheldon Fallbrook, will soon be reimbursing him. That night, they break into Sheldon's house, rob him, and KO the old man, landing him in the hospital. Bruce is a family friend of the Fallbrooks and visits Sheldon there. Alone inside the room, he notices a specific imprint on Sheldon's unconscious face. The Dark Knight brings the information back to the Batcomputer, where he and Dick Grayson discover the imprint matches the logo of a fraternity Lawford and his friends are a part of. Their family businesses, where they receive their inheritance, also line up with the masks the Terrible Trio wear. Meanwhile, Rebecca accidentally finds out her boyfriend and his buddies are the ones responsible for putting her father in the hospital. Seeing no other choice, Lawford labels her as a loose end that needs to be tied up, just as Batman starts to track down the well-off robbers. The story for the Terrible Trio was put together by producer Alan Burnett and, once again, series story editor Michael Reeves. Reeves wrote the teleplay by himself in his fifth and final writing assignment that we're covering for this year's Batman. Now, the script for this episode is not up to standard. It's just not. The rich and deep characterization that we usually get invested in is completely absent here. It's replaced with a cast of players that have next to no value. They're not amusing, they're not sympathetic, they're not interesting. There's nothing for us to care about or latch onto here. No real mystery to follow or clear goal we want Batman to succeed in. Of course, there's the standard get the bad guy element, but when you'd rather see your antagonists removed from the screen as soon as possible instead of watching Batman dole out some just desserts, there's a problem. Even if these characters were subpar from their comic book origins, usually this show could turn that around in a reinterpretation. I'm harping on this because it's so rare to see this show not reach the standard of quality we're used to. It's only one of a few major issues, but the main idea of a small group of non-threatening rich guys robbing other rich people is not compelling in the slightest. I'm sure it could have been made that way, but the final product does not get there. Maybe something big was lost in the translation from page to screen, I'm not sure. Michael Reeves was involved in the writing of some of my favorite episodes of this show, and Alan Burnett has Two-Face, Mudslide, and Read My Lips to his name, writing or co-writing the stories for those and a couple more good to great episodes. Director Frank Parr also has a few classics to his credit, like Shadow of the Bat Parts 1 and 2 and Paging the Crime Doctor, but his skills do little to improve an already flat story. Although I can say that the climax was strung together pretty well. There were actually a couple decent shots in there that would, most of the time, make for some very strong visuals. However, they aren't even close to what they could have been because of this installment's biggest negative aspect, the animation. This was the only episode Jade Animation worked on by themselves, though they did provide the ink and paint services on If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Rich and Day of the Samurai. I mentioned in my review of the latter how subpar the animation work was. At the time, I blamed it on the main animation company for those installments, Blue Pencil SI, but after once again seeing the Terrible Trio, I think Jade Animation should also be held accountable. Almost every scene in this moves at a very odd pace. They give Robin creepy lips, there are inconsistencies throughout, all the established characters look off-model or like their faces are melting as they speak, and like I said previously, any shots that could have looked great move in a distractingly awkward fashion. It's too bad because the climax has a great backdrop. It's just about the only thing that I was into. While Blue Pencil SI didn't work on anything DCAU related after Day of the Samurai, Jade stayed on board and went on to animate 4 episodes of the Superman show. I think one of the oddest things about an already odd episode is the scene with Sheldon Fallbrook in the hospital. He's presented as a still background painting, one of the weirdest decisions I've ever seen on this show. There's one animated shot where Bruce moves his head, but every other frame of this strange scene that has him in it, he's stone cold still. Now, I'll admit I do like when they do this most of the time. Usually it enhances the shot, like in Perchance to Dream or Heart of Ice. A face can be a background painting if there's a motivation for it, or there's some animation on top of it, like eyes or hair moving. But here, it's like Rebecca and Bruce are interacting with a statue. What a bizarre choice. Maybe they got the animation for it and it just looked too bad, so they went with a background instead. I would love to know why they made that decision. Even the title card is a weird one. The words are animated to move in a spooky way? I don't know. The music by Shirley Walker, which is solid throughout the episode, suggests something creepy or ominous, but it just doesn't match the story we got. Other than that, the title card is kind of simplistic, but looks pretty cool. They always did. My favorite little moment is Batman's rubbery expression here. They'd shown comparable shots in multiple episodes where Batman's eyes and mouth widen, but this was another level of shock, like he just read the script for Batman and Robin or something. Batman ends up saving Rebecca from the trio, trying to push her off a cliff while she's unconscious inside her car. The aim was to make it look like an accident. The Dark Knight then subdues the crooks one by one in a snow-covered forest area, apprehending Lawford last. We cut to a prison cell sometime later. It's Warren's first day in the Slammer as he's locked inside his new home with cockroaches and an intimidating cellmate. The story finishes on Lawford, horrified by his new surroundings. I'll quickly mention that Warren Lawford was voiced by Bill Mumy. Mumy is famous for his Twilight Zone appearances from when he was a kid. He's still a working actor today, and it was a nice little surprise to see him in the credits. Just a cool little tidbit where Batman and the Twilight-tober Zone cross over. I do have a source for that claim I made earlier about this being Bruce Timm's least favorite episode. Apparently, Timm has been posting in the forums of AnimeSuperhero.com for nearly 20 years. He made this statement back in 2004 while listing his least favorite DCAU episodes. The Terrible Trio was at the top of the list, along with Cat Scratch Fever and Animal Act from Batman, and Superman's Pal and Heavy Metal from the Superman series. For me personally, this one is up there among the worst too. Unlike an episode like Day of the Samurai, which had bad animation but a pretty memorable story, the Terrible Trio falls short on all fronts. There are a few things to sort of like about it, the climax and maybe the ending bit in the cell being among them, but I'd have a tough time convincing myself that there was a substantially inferior episode up to this point in the series. I wouldn't even recommend this one from a so bad it's good perspective. It's just dull and has no hook. But I'm sure there are people out there who like it, and if you do, that's fine. In my opinion, though, the Terrible Trio, unfortunately, lives up to its name. Harleyquinnade is a real showcase for the Harley Quinn character, who was obviously gaining popularity among viewers and the creative team going into the show's second season. We hear a little more about her background and her dysfunctional relationship with the Joker starting to become a regular thing. We had seen them bicker before this, especially in the trial episode, but the volatile attraction between them is given a little more detail here. The Joker crashes a black market bid for an atomic bomb capable of destroying most of Gotham, and through his insane threats, he's able to leave with it in his possession. The cops and Batman are made aware of the situation and are desperate to find Joker before he blows up the city. A radical idea by Batman sees the Dark Knight acquire the help of Harley Quinn. In exchange for her release from Arkham, Quinn agrees to aid Batman in tracking down the Clown Prince of Crime, hoping to find him prior to the bomb drop. Along the way, the Caped Crusader, Robin, and Harley run into multiple dangerous, yet wacky situations. Harley Quinn co-creator Paul Dini wrote the script for Harleyquinnade, and he clearly had a lot of fun doing it. While the stakes are high, this episode finds plenty of time for lighter, more comedic scenes. You get a real sense of Harley's personality away from the Joker as we start to scratch the surface of her obsession with him. I know a lot of people think Harley Quinn is overexposed nowadays, but the character connects with countless fans around the world for a reason. This was just the beginning of that, and it's no wonder why so many people were drawn to her. She comes off as legitimately funny and generally likable in this episode.
Did you see the way I handled those creeps? Pow! Bam! Ooh, Batgirl, eat your heart out! Ha! And here you thought I was just another bubble-headed blonde bimbo. Well, the joke's on you. I'm not even a real blonde.
That made me laugh out loud on my last rewatch. I can't underscore enough how great Arlene Sorkin was in this role. She just nailed all her deliveries, while the character was still forming her identity in those early years. There's a lot of good stuff in the commentary track from Dini, Bruce Timm, Shirley Walker, and Eric Radomski. One of the more ironic points of conversation had Dini talk about how he didn't think Harley could hold her own show at the time, although he did previously work on a Harley and Ivy program for late-night TV, which never got the go-ahead.
I'm not sure she's a lead character.
She needs the Joker.
Yeah.
It's the two of them together.
Or if it's Harley solo, then they'd have to give her a family and, crazy relatives that are wackier than she is, and you don't really want to do that.
It's funny to hear him throw out ideas that they eventually did in the Harley Quinn animated series years later. While Harley has a big supporting cast in that show, it's a popular series now that's currently in between its second and third seasons. Batman's interactions with Harley are really fun. Their odd couple pairing made Bruce the perfect straight man to Harley's goofy antics. This wasn't the last time we'd see this dynamic either, so Harleyquinnade proved a successful way to introduce it. As he started to question why a person with some kind of moral compass is infatuated with a serial-killing madman, we started to feel a bit of sympathy for Quinn. She's obviously trapped in a vicious cycle. Her previous profession proved she was trying to help people before, so how and why did she leave her morals and good sense behind for a violent psychopath? You have to remember, this aired in 1994. While the one-shot comic book story Mad Love by Dini and Timm had hit the shops by then, the specifics on Harley's turn to the dark side weren't well known yet. All this backstory was just starting to make its way to the surface in the show, so when we got little teases about the genesis of her and her Puddin's relationship, it made the character more and more intriguing.
When I was a doctor, I was always listening to other people's problems. Then I met Mr. J, who listened to me for a change and made everything fun.
You think it's funny when he hurts people?
It's just a joke.
One of the elements that makes this installment stand out is the music. Shirley Walker mentioned in the commentary track that she got to make a more cartoonish score than usual. While there's definitely a lighter tone to the soundtrack, we still have a decent amount of the show's more familiar melodies mixed in, so that made for some diverse listening. In addition to the music, they also made sure to add a fair number of more cartoony sound effects.
Ha ha! Ow! Oh, come on, Bats. Had me all locked up in his bad old car, too.
There's a great scene where Harley and Batman stumble upon a secret criminal nightclub. Bruce is double-crossed by Quinn and tied up by the gangsters. Harley knows she's not out of the woods as the proprietor of the establishment, Boxy Bennett, suspects something's up. When she sees Robin arrive outside, Harley causes a distraction by singing a number on stage.
So I tried to be aloof when you pushed me off the roof. I feel our romance is dead.
I love Batman pounding his head there. The song is called Say That We're Sweethearts Again, from the 1944 MGM musical comedy Meet the People, starring a pre-I Love Lucy Lucille Ball. It's a perfect tune to describe Joker and Harley's relationship. Listen to the full song or read the lyrics to see why. This enjoyable little sequence has a pretty cool backstory that Paul Dini described in the commentary.
Arlene and I lived within about a mile of each other, and we'd go to the recordings together some days and just drive over together. And she was working on an audition piece for some singing she was doing, and she had found this old song called Say That We're Sweethearts Again from an old MGM musical called Meet the People. And I've never seen it, although they occasionally show it on Turner Classic Movies. And she just happened to be singing it in the car, rehearsing it. And I heard the lyrics, and I was going, man, if there was ever a song that defines Harley and the Joker's relationship, that's it.
It's great. It's as if it was written for her.
And it has that old 1940s screwball feel to it. And we thought, well, if we could ever get it in the show, it would be awesome to do it.
Spoilers for the ending. After nabbing the bomb, Joker takes Mayor Hill hostage, forcing him to stop any evacuations of the city. Harley is eventually able to lead the dynamic duo to Hill's mansion, where Joker is about to take off in a plane, leaving Gotham to explode behind him. Batman and Robin stop him initially, but Quinn breaks her deal and rejoins the Joker, giving him the upper hand. When our heroes remind Harley that all her friends and even her pet hyenas will be killed with the rest of the city, she switches sides again, helping the Dark Knight and Boy Wonder escape. They stop the countdown clock on the bomb as Joker attacks from the air, almost igniting the explosive with bullets.
Laugh this off!
Warden!
After being knocked loopy by Quinn's weapon, Joker crashes the plane into the mayor's mansion and emerges largely unharmed. Harley then holds him at gunpoint as her puddin' taunts her.
You don't have the guts! Not in a million years, would you?
Surprising everyone close by, she actually pulls the trigger. But unknown to Harley, it's a dummy gun. Admiring her chutzpah, Joker opens his arms and Quinn embraces him, ending this wacky roller coaster of a story. Credits got to go to everyone involved here. You can include Ronnie Del Carmen and Eric Radomski's title card in that praise too. It's one of my favorites. They all pulled off an abnormal story for this series in a very entertaining way. If there's one thing that's not as high quality as the rest of the show though, it's Dong Yang's animation. It's not bad and has some solid sequences, but we've seen better from them. Just a little nitpick. Also, this is one of those episodes where a lot of cell dirt made it through the restoration process. It has more visible blemishes than a lot of other HD installments on the Blu-ray set. I should mention that Mark Hamill's Joker is great as per the normal. While he's not the focus, we do get a trademark Joker Venom scene that reinforces his unpredictably twisted nature.
You really should loosen up, dear. Have a laugh now and then.
Yeah, that's never not going to be horrifying. His willingness to wipe the entire city off the map was a big step up. Trying to take care of Batman, the police, and the whole shebang in one fell swoop gave him a more cut-and-run attitude than usual. But as always, Joker survives another encounter with death, by this time woozily walking out of a fiery plane crash seconds after the impact. In the original script, a helicopter was supposed to be used as the character's getaway transportation, but director Kevin Altieri changed it to a World War I era plane. It works great that way and presents more comedic opportunities with the Joker in the old-school pilot outfit. Plus, it improves the action with the use of that gun turret. Kudos to Altieri for directing a really strong and unique episode with a few very memorable moments. Even if you're not a huge fan of Harley Quinn, this is just a well-written, directed, and acted installment of Batman the Animated Series. It covers a lot of bases, being funny and exciting while advancing Harley's character further on her path to becoming one of the most beloved DC characters of the last 30 years.
Say that we're sweethearts again.
The Clock King returns in Time Out of Joint. This would be his second and final appearance in Batman the Animated Series. However, 11 years later, he did show up in another DCAU program, Justice League Unlimited. The episode, Task Force X, portrayed him as a part of a top-secret team attempting to break into the jail's watchtower. As for his last go-around in this series, a science fiction element is introduced that suited him well, and made for a bit of an uncommon, superpowered story. Bruce and Dick are attending a charity auction that turns into a crime scene when a timepiece from the reign of Louis XVI vanishes out of thin air. The crowd is stunned as we see the culprit throw away the item in the back alley of the venue, calling it a trial run. The offender is none other than Temple Fugit, the Clock King. He somehow escaped his demise at the end of his titular episode and is back posing as the butler for Dr. Wakati, the father of quantum temporal theory, or the structure of time. The Doctor lives in a remote location and has created a device that can slow down or speed up time relative to the person or thing it's attached to. He was hoping to use it for the betterment of mankind, but Fugit has other ideas. He swipes a few of the devices and, continuing his motivation from his first appearance, is shown to still be trying to get revenge on Mayor Hamilton Hill for making a suggestion that ruined his career years ago. When he makes his move on the mayor, Batman and Robin intervene. However, the Clock King escapes with the aid of the time control device. The dynamic duo soon put two and two together and start traveling to Dr. Wakati's secluded research facility to stop Fugit before it's too late. Alan Burnett conceived this story, while the teleplay was written by Steve Perry. Perry had 6 other writing credits on the show that included Mudslide, The Mechanic, and Terror in the Sky. His solid scripts continued with Time Out of Joint. Dan Reba got to direct this one as he continued to establish himself as a go-to director for quality installments. I'm sure the whole creative team had a good time crafting this episode. The Clock King had a really strong reinterpretation in this series after being around since 1960. Through his improved look, demeanor, and underappreciated theme, he's one of the more low-key, enjoyable villains on the show, and I think they could have used him in a few more episodes. Pushing his gimmick into the manipulation of time itself proves there was potential to have kept pushing the envelope with similar stories. Granted, this was a little more on the sci-fi end of things than they usually did on this more grounded series, but I think it could have been pulled off in a way that didn't betray the tone of the show. This episode certainly didn't. Speaking of sci-fi, the Time Out of Joint title shares its name with a novel by sci-fi author Philip K. Dick. Dick himself got the name from a line in Shakespeare's Hamlet. So I pretty much love this time manipulation concept. They don't half-ass its applications, they really push it to its full potential. Batman and Robin end up using the technology to fight back against the Clock King's plans in the climax. But earlier, Fugit attaches one of the devices to the Batmobile.
Fugit's booby-trapped the car. We're trapped in time.
Pitch-perfect line read by Kevin Conroy. You can always argue logistics with this type of stuff, but the fact that Clock King kept our heroes off his tail by literally slowing them down was brilliant. Spoilers for the rest of the installment. Batman is able to destroy the time manipulation device with his grappling hook, but when he and Robin break out of their temporal prison, they've lost 48 hours, and the Batmobile is damaged. At Dr. Wakati's research building, they discover that the old man has been frozen by one of the gadgets. Upon releasing him, they find out Fugit plans on attacking the mayor at the new courthouse's dedication. Problem is, the ceremony starts in 2 minutes. The dynamic duo take a few of Wakati's devices and speed back downtown on their bikes.
Whoa! Faster than a speeding bullet.
Clock King has attached a bomb under Mayor Hill's podium. When he christens the courthouse with a ceremonial gavel smash, it will go off, killing everyone nearby. The Dark Knight and Boy Wonder arrive on the scene, but Hill just unintentionally activated the bomb. With time around him already moving super slow, Batman sticks one of the time gadgets to the bomb and races off like the Flash. The bomb slowly explodes as the Caped Crusader runs on water and chucks it into the river, resulting in a massive splash from the underwater explosion. Just after this, Robin apprehends Fugit and the day is saved. Back at his location, Dr. Wakati decides the world isn't ready for his time manipulation tools and puts them away for good. Roscoe Lee Brown voiced Dr. Wakati here, and he did a good job for his only DCAU appearance outside of a pair of Static Shock episodes. He had a very distinct voice and was decently well known for a few roles across his career. But I know him best from the 90s animated Spider-Man series, where he iconically played Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin.
Is mankind civilized enough to make the proper use of it? It pleases me greatly knowing that my relationship with my son is nothing like I went through with my own father.
Quick shout out to Carl Johnson, who provided a really nice musical score. He also composed the music to His Silicon Soul and the phenomenal tunes in Beware the Grey Ghost, among a few others. This was his last composition for the series. Time Out of Joint is Batmay approved. You should really see this one. There's nothing like watching Batman essentially given the Flash's powers for a few minutes. It's really cool to see him speed off over the river like that. The central idea of time manipulation is a great one, and again, it's used here in a more than satisfactory manner. Give this a chance, and those 21 minutes will go by in a gratifying blur. Selina Kyle returns to some of her old ways in Catwalk. While there is a fair amount of action in it, this episode felt like it focused more on the Catwoman character and her own inner conflict. Her journey up until this point in the show and her contemplations on how she wants to live her life take center stage. Selina Kyle is the guest of Bruce Wayne at the opening of a wildlife exhibit at a Gotham museum. As she looks upon the Black Leopard display, she reminisces on her time as Catwoman, her dualist relationship with the Batman, and how she was forced to give up her life as a costume thief. Missing her evenings as a child of the night and admitting to Bruce that she often feels tempted to return to it, Selina feels very out of place among Wayne's rich friends. When Veronica Vreeland greets Bruce and his date, she remembers Kyle from another time they met and shows her the museum's conservation hall, thinking Selina will be impressed with its dedication to preserving endangered species. But Kyle quips that Veronica's grandfather, who the hall was built in honor of, was forced into the conservation business because he was ruthless in killing any nearby wildlife. Thus, he'd have nothing left to hunt if the animals weren't saved. This rude outburst causes Selina to leave, but she's picked up outside by a car containing the ventriloquist and his dangerous Scarface persona. Scarface is looking to cut a deal with her to steal a few diamonds inside the museum, claiming it's a foolproof plan and she won't be caught. They'd split the profits 50-50. Kyle agrees, and Catwoman finds her way inside the museum that evening. In the middle of the heist, Scarface turns on her, hoping she'll take the fall while his men get what he was really after inside one of the exhibits. Catwoman evades police custody anyway and returns home where she's confronted by Batman. Lying to him that she was trying to stop a burglary to earn some points with the cops, they return to the museum to inform the authorities of her story. However, that's where Catwoman's morally ambiguous nature starts to take over. Paul Dini wrote this episode solo, and Boyd Kirkland directed it. Interestingly, this was the first full Catwoman installment that Dini penned for the series. He wrote for her in the classic Almost Got Him, but she wasn't nearly as big of a presence as she was in Catwalk. Selina is basically the main character here. He presents her as more introspective than we had seen previously. This story also sort of sets Catwoman back to basics after a long-term arc that saw her reform a bit. Dini also seemed to like placing Selina on conveyor belts with spinning blades at the end. As for Boyd Kirkland, this was the second time he directed a Catwoman-centric episode, his first being Season 1's Cat Scratch Fever. I think this is the clear winner among those two. The first couple minutes are an exaggerated recap of Selina's journey so far. It's almost dreamlike, as we watch her in the character's most natural state before she met her match in Batman. We then see her on trial at a court hearing, which was a story point in Cat Scratch Fever. She's been repressing her inner nature for quite a while now, and it's starting to come to a head. Credit to Dong Yang for animating a very sleek little sequence. It catches us up on who Catwoman was and where she had been, while also managing to throw in a few surreal visuals. Scarface makes his return here in a solid outing for him and the ventriloquist. There's no deep psychological stuff with them this time, but that's to be expected since they aren't the main focus. Scarface's interactions with Selina across this episode are pretty great. They have a fun antagonistic chemistry.
You gotta be kidding.
What's you laughing at? My fly ain't open, is it? No, sir. So what's the gag?
Oh, come on, you know. What's the gag?
Can it, sister? I thought I saw a booty tat.
Spoilers ahead for the climax and rest of the story. After seeing that the taxidermied extinct animals were stolen out of their display case, Selina lets slip a bit more info than she should. Batman picks up on it, and she runs, escaping the museum to go after Scarface. Being one step ahead, the Dark Knight placed a transmitter on Selina's cat, Isis, and follows them to a lumber mill where Scarface is trying to sell off the rare animals for a hefty price. Catwoman is sighted while there, and a fight ensues. Batman steps in to even the odds, which eventually results in the Scarface dummy being crushed by falling logs and then burned thanks to Kyle. The Caped Crusader then confronts Catwoman about her involvement in this scheme from the beginning.
I have to be who I am. I realize now I can't change that. Like I told someone else tonight. It's just the cat in me.
To cover her getaway, Catwoman throws one of the extinct animals near the fire below. She taunts Batman that it's the last of its kind.
Will you take me in or let it become extinct again? The lady or the tiger, darling?
Batman saves the carcass from destruction, which lets Catwoman go free to return to her true self, as lonely as that might be.
I am the cat who walks by herself.
That line was repeated a few times across the episode. It's supposedly a reference to the English writer Rudyard Kipling, specifically his story of a similar name. In the same way, Catwoman's line of "the lady or the tiger" may have been meant to allude to Frank R. Stockton's short story, which shares the line as its title. But I think a bigger reason this was in there was because that dialogue was used in the Adam West Batman show by Julie Newmar's Catwoman.
The lady or the tiger?
While we saw Catwoman revert to her self-described true nature, Bruce/Batman was portrayed as being heartbroken by the end. They had been through a lot together by this point, and you can tell he was hoping she would have made a different choice. But this is their whole dynamic, isn't it? Always just missing each other on seeing eye to eye. I like Catwalk as a story that depicts Selina struggling with who she wants to be. There are some very strong scenes tucked inside, with some memorable character interactions and images too. It's far from one of the best the series has to offer, but it's worth a recommendation, especially if you're a fan of this character's complexities.
What's wrong, ventriloquist? Cat got your tongue?
Bane is one of the best Season 2 episodes of Batman the Animated Series. The pacing is very cinematic, filled with great action, character, mystery, and just overall smart writing. It was broadcast for the first time on September 10th, 1994, the year after the famous Nightfall storyline began in the comics. It's also notable for a few more reasons, so let's get into it. Rupert Thorne has had enough of Batman's meddling and hires infamous South American mercenary Bane to finally take him out once and for all. Right away, Bane makes his presence known as more of a strategic-minded adversary by studying Batman's moves, motivations, and weaknesses. He easily takes out the mighty Killer Croc and damages the Batmobile with his bare hands, just to mess with the Dark Knight. Sometime after the dynamic duo discover his origins as an experimented-on prisoner, Bane captures a spying Robin and threatens to kill him unless Batman faces the assassin one-on-one. Considering Bane's brilliant mind for combat coupled with his chemically enhanced strength, the Caped Crusader may have finally met his match. As I mentioned earlier this month, Bane was the first time the Adventures of Batman and Robin intro aired, replacing the original opening. I've said my piece about it already, but in another example of odd inconsistencies, they do show the correct ending credits image of Batman and Robin at the finish of this installment on the Blu-ray. Although, the music that's playing is the version of the Danny Elfman Batman movie theme that always aired previous to this. On HBO Max, the correct Shirley Walker theme is played. Don't mean to keep pointing that out, but it is weird when you're watching all these back-to-back and see such a blatant contradiction. Bane was written by Mitch Brian, the final of only 3 episodes he did for the show. Brian has the distinction of penning the series' first official installment, On Leather Wings, and also coming up with the story for the underrated POV episode. He did a great job of introducing Bane into this continuity. Maybe even too good of a job, because this story seemed so epic in scale while building up a legit physical and mental threat for Batman, things wrap up a little too quickly in my opinion. It felt like part 1 of a 2-part story. Maybe that was the original idea, but it was shot down or something, since none of Season 2's episodes are 2-parters. That doesn't tank this installment in the slightest, but giving this story more breathing room would have probably improved it a bit. Expanding on that, if they ever went all the way with their version of Nightfall, it might have worked as a long-term story with Batman crawling his way back to Gotham. Even something like a truncated 4-part story would have sufficed. But this show was always more about standalone episodes, which had more pros than cons for the creative team since this became one of the most respected animated series of all time. Kevin Altieri got to direct Bane's debut, and everything looks great. No surprise from one of the show's more well-known directors. The action sequences in particular feel more commendatory than usual, and the imposing figure of the antagonist casts a shadow of foreboding menace across this whole story. Dong Yang got to do a lot with the animation, and a few shots in particular look pretty crazy. I'm mostly referring to when Bane pumps himself up with venom and hulks out. In contrast to something like the Batman and Robin movie that gave Bane all of the brawn with none of the brain, and even The Dark Knight Rises that replaced the Venom steroid with a pain reliever, this is a pretty close interpretation to how the character originally acted in the comics. His appearance is almost spot on, except for the slight alterations to the mask. I do wish we could have gotten his face fully covered. It just looks more intimidating. I think they were leaning a touch into the masked pro wrestler stereotype with this version. That's even reflected in some of the fight choreography. Having the nose and mouth cut out allowed him to be more emotive, though. Either way, it's 100% better than his BDSM redesign from the new Batman adventures. As for the character in general, Bane was calculating, intelligent, a great tactical mastermind, a powerful fighter, and could always gain the upper hand through the chemical compound pumping all over his body.
I will observe the bat in action, and when I understand how he thinks and fights, I will break him.
Bane was voiced by Henry Silva, who filled out the role well. Early on, we're shown Bane isn't to be messed with when he disposes of Killer Croc without a problem. Used as a harbinger for Batman's forthcoming showdown with the new villain, Croc warns the Dark Knight.
He had an accent, South American or something.
See, that wasn't so hard.
You'll know hard, Bats, once he sucks that juice into his brain and snaps you in two.
This was the last time Aaron Kincaid voiced Killer Croc. The character did appear in the new Batman adventures, but actor Brooks Gardner took over the part. Lolita Ritmanis provided an appropriate score for Bane's first adventure. I really liked how the music was used to improve the character's on-screen presence. Ritmanis ended up doing a lot of DC animated work, continuing recently with the newest episodes of Young Justice. Incoming spoilers for how this all wraps up. Batman and Bane clash on a boat called the Rose's Thorn as Robin's life hangs in the balance. In a break from the action, Batman frees his sidekick, but this lands the Boy Wonder in a distracting tussle with Rupert Thorne's associate and Bane's handler, Candace. Bane and the Dark Knight continue their struggle until a fateful moment strikes a familiar pose.
You are beaten! Now I will break you!
At the last second, Batman stabs Bane's Venom device with a crushed batarang. It leaks all over the assassin and pumps an uncontrollable amount into his body. Overloaded with the chemical, Bane loses it. Holy crap, that whole little sequence is nuts. Dude was about to explode into a million pieces. Credit again to Dong Yang and Henry Silva for giving that moment some intense believability. Batman pulls out the main tube to Bane's head and the mercenary collapses, completely drained. Bruce escorts a defeated Bane back to Rupert Thorne's office. He unmasks the assassin and informs the crime boss that his hired gun and Candace plan to kill Rupert after they took out Batman. Our hero walks out of the room to the screams of Thorne as we fade to black. Like I said at the top of the video, I did really enjoy this episode. It's an all-timer for how movie-like this story plays out, and they introduced a new villain to more people who would go on to become one of Batman's greatest. But that rushed finish did leave me wanting more. Also, Robin being relegated to having a splash fight with Candace felt a bit insulting, to be honest. Regardless, you should go out of your way to see Bane. With all the other interpretations of the character that have appeared in movies and TV since, I think this one will give you one of the best examples of why he worked in the first place.
You can't do this to me! I am invincible! I am Bane!
If you read the concept to Baby Doll on paper, both the episode and character, it probably would have come off as too ridiculous for this show. But then again, this team did make the ventriloquist in Scarface work. Turns out, Baby Doll isn't just one of the more emotionally driven, tragic villain stories in the whole show. The character itself has developed a cult following, and people have been asking when I'll be getting to this episode since I started Batman. Well, here it is, and it's just as heartbreaking as I remember. Mary Louise Dahl used to be the lead of a popular family sitcom called Love That Baby. The actress suffers from systemic hypoplasia, which has kept her from aging. This is why she was playing a little girl on the show into her 20s. Eventually, she left the series, which shut it down completely. Her aim was then to become a serious actress, and after several failed attempts at filling more dramatic roles, she was mocked, and her new career direction bombed disastrously. Now, years later, some of the other actors from the Love That Baby series have gone missing. We see that Dahl has forcibly gathered them together for a twisted reunion of sorts. She hopes to relive her glory days while getting revenge on some of the castmates who wronged her. Batman and Robin follow the clues, trying to track down where Dahl has taken her television family before they all end up canceled. Permanently. Paul Dini wrote this episode and is credited as the sole creator of the Baby Doll character. Just another notch in his belt on what became a legendary run for him on this show. I'm sure there was some kind of influence from the 1962 film Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, but still, taking a concept like this and playing it as a sad, deranged drama just shows how creative he can be when coming up with or adapting characters in his scripts. Dan Reba directed Baby Doll, and I'm sure he had fun leading the charge on the wide variance of scenes we were treated to. There are some of the standard Gotham locations, but we go from old sitcom-style footage to an abandoned television studio to an amusement park and more. This episode gave us an array of locations to feast our eyes upon. Animating for the last time on BTAS was Studio Junio, who had a pretty solid track record in the 7 installments they worked on. I still say Dreams in Darkness takes the top spot for me, but Baby Doll and the rest of their work shouldn't be overlooked. Here, Heavy Shadows gave plenty of images a weight that ranged from ominous and frightening to introspective and sad. One of the character designs for a member of the television family Dollop Ducks, Spunky, looks and moves an awful lot like a human in one of the more comedic cartoons Warner Brothers were producing around the same time, like Freakazoid or Animaniacs. Don't know why that stuck out to me so much, but it was really noticeable on the rewatch. That didn't negatively affect anything, just relaying a thought. Pretty much every scene in Baby Doll has a few standout visuals, so credit where credit is due. Speaking of Spunky, he has an interesting backstory that even connects to one of this episode's voiceover artists. Spunky is actually the name of the character this character played in the final season of Love That Baby. When the ratings began to slip, Cousin Spunky was brought on in hopes of reinvigorating interest in the series by adding a new cute kid to the cast. Sitcoms in the real world have done this on several occasions, and it almost never works. So much so that the phenomenon has a name: Cousin Oliver Syndrome. I don't know how many Brady Bunch fans we have out there, but I was definitely a consistent viewer when I was younger thanks to Nick at Night. Cousin Oliver Syndrome is named after Cousin Oliver from the final season of that show. The main cast had grown too old to be the cute little kid, so they added Cousin Oliver to recapture some of the original appeal. The actor who played Oliver, Robbie Rist, voices Brian Daly, Baby Doll's TV brother. Not sure why they didn't just go all the way with that and just have him voice Spunky. Jason Marsden provides the voice for the teenage version of that character instead. Marsden is a prolific voice actor who went on to be used in a bunch more DCAU projects after this. His voice is pretty recognizable upon hearing it.
What are you mad at me for? It wasn't anything personal.
Adding to the sitcom Easter eggs, the two henchmen Baby Doll uses are clearly modeled after Gilligan and the Skipper from Gilligan's Island. It's fun to just pretend that's really them. Times got hard after they got off that island, so they turned to crime. Where's that episode? Let's also not forget Miriam, Doll's bodyguard and distraction tool. She never showed up before or after this, but she kicked the crap out of everyone she faced.
Wow, lady, you're good.
It's a living.
I'm not sure if she's based on any sitcom stereotype, but if you think she is, please comment about it below. Mary Doll herself is a fascinating character. She's lost it to the point that she plays the Baby Doll role in almost every scene we see her in. It's the cutesy type of delivery consistent with more sitcom tropes. She even has a catchphrase.
I didn't mean to.
But when she doesn't get what she wants, I love how dark she can turn while still playing the part.
Mr. Happyhead says you're really gonna get it now.
Good lord, her doll is a gun. Brilliant. Everything is a performance, even when she kind of drops the act later on. Alison LaPlaca did a fantastic job playing with the range of her voice, and that contrast is showcased a few times in some great sequences.
I knows now I made a boo-boo.
It was hard for me out there. I studied and trained and auditioned, but no one wanted me. Over the years, I remembered how happy I was with all of you around me and the folks at home watching me.
Baby doll. Now I'm baby for good and everyone will love me again. Hugs, hugs!
At the heart of the character is a deep sadness. She's a starved-for-attention former star who just wants to be loved again. The rejection she faced from her attempt to branch out into other roles, in combination with the ridicule she probably got because of her condition, hurt her so much that she lucidly regressed to this childlike mentality. She's also desperate to feel a closeness with anyone, going as far to artificially recreate the fiction of the Love That Baby show, complete with the original pet dog, now stuffed, cameras pretending to roll, and audience reactions on tape. Aiding this madness is the music. In addition to the standard Batman sort of stuff, they got to play with some legit sitcom-sounding themes. Twisting that theme into a dark place and to accompany an exciting chase scene was really cool to listen to. Spoilers from here on out. Doll kidnaps the actor who played Spunky last and brings him to the abandoned studio with the rest of the family. Since his character upstaged her in the final season, she tries to recreate a birthday scene where Spunky embarrassed her. This time with a dynamite birthday candle right in front of the actor. Spunky is able to get the dynamite far enough away from the table to where no one is hurt, which is immediately followed by Batman flying in through the above skylight. He takes out the two henchmen as Spunky reveals himself to be Robin in disguise. Batman placed a tracker on him so they could find the villain's hideout. After a spirited fight with Miriam, Batman chases Doll to a nearby amusement park. This ultimately leads to the Mirror Maze section of the Funhouse, where Doll becomes mesmerized by one reflection that distorts her features into a fully grown adult.
Look, that's me in there. The real me. But it's not really real, is it? Just made up and pretend like my family and my life and everything else. Why couldn't you just let me make believe?
In this scene, they do the classic and always effective shattering of mirrors reflecting a character. In this case, there are images of Batman being shot at by Mary's doll gun. She tears up looking at the only untouched mirror, showing what she feels like on the inside. We fade out, and that's all, folks. Talk about an intense, sorrowful ending. They really humanized Mary in that last scene. There were hints of that early on, but the image of what she should look like cuts deep, and you can't help but feel sorry for her. Really smart choices were made in the last few minutes, from the writing to the visuals to the voice acting, music, and sound effects. Exceptional work all around. At the amusement park, I loved how Batman drew all the kids from the crowd toward him by making himself visible so he could spot Mary. Again, very clever stuff. I kind of wish we got a wrap-up scene with the sitcom family recovering or Mary seeking help in prison, but this was a powerful way to end the episode. I can best describe it as an emotional gut punch that left us gasping for air while the credits rolled. Baby Doll is one installment that you shouldn't skimp out on. It's got a really unique angle on a Batman villain, and the story is executed to near perfection. Check this out if you haven't, or give it a rewatch when you find yourself in the mood.
I didn't mean to.
This may be the second to last edition of Batmay for this year, but we've reached the final episode that aired, not just for Season 2, but the original run of Batman the Animated Series as a whole. Of course, we still have 32 installments to get through because, number 1, we're continuing to proceed in the creative team's preferred production order, and number 2, I'm including the new Batman adventures in our coverage, which will start and complete next year. But September 15th, 1995 was the last day fans saw a new Batman episode until the next series started 2 full years later. This story is all about Alfred. After receiving an urgent call from his cousin, Freddie, Pennyworth hurriedly flies to London, leaving a note for Bruce and Dick. Once there, he's abducted by a pair of thugs and brought to Blairquan Castle in Scotland. Redclaw is revealed to be the mastermind behind this situation, and she's now captured both Frederick and Alfred. She's discovered that there's a hidden ballistic missile silo inside the castle, and the two men she has in her custody are among the only people in the world who know the two-part password to activate it. Redclaw demands £5 billion from the British government, or she'll blow up London. Meanwhile, Bruce is tipped off that something's wrong after receiving a distressing call from Pennyworth as he was being taken. Batman and Robin fly overseas to bring him home, and on the way, Wayne informs Grayson of Alfred's past as a government agent in the British Secret Services, which is why he holds such massively important information. The dynamic duo go international to stop the missile and retrieve their loyal friend in The Lion and the Unicorn. This episode has 3 writers attached to it. Steve Perry we know from a few other installments, including the recently reviewed Time Out of Joint, but this is the sole credit for the other 2. Peter Morwood, incorrectly referred to as Philip Morwood in the credits, is primarily a novelist who only has a few TV scripts to his name, this being one of them. His wife, Diane Duane, has significantly more television scripts in her filmography, while also being a prominent science fiction and fantasy author herself. Together, the trio crafted an entertaining spy story that expanded past Gotham. With the ever-reliable Boyd Kirkland on board as director, The Lion and the Unicorn proved to have a different tone than many other episodes. It's memorable for the information we got on Alfred's backstory and the scenery change of seeing Batman and Robin operate in the UK. They tried to make London look distinct from Gotham by upping the fog and putting that hazy filter on the image. One of my favorite scenes is when our heroes interact with a few government officials.
Him and that fellow from Clerical.
Pennyworth. Alfred Pennyworth.
How did you get in here?
We don't have time for protocol. What was the name of that castle?
And why should we give you that information?
Because I can give you Redclaw.
The music by Brian Langsberg also aids the story by creating a unique aura to the sequences overseas. Langsberg only worked on this and the episode Lockup, but I enjoyed his score. Redclaw makes her second and final BTAS appearance in The Lion and the Unicorn. It's fitting that she's the last villain featured in the air date order before everything was revamped 2 years later, since she was the first pure antagonist audiences saw in The Cat and the Claw Part 1, which premiered the series in 1992. As a character, she's okay. Honestly, not all that special, but it was cool to see her make a comeback outside of Gotham. The henchmen used by Redclaw to apprehend Alfred and later fight Batman and Robin are named Bert and Ernie, which is hilarious. Could just be the bumbling British thing, but they also remind me of Jasper and Horace from 101 Dalmatians.
Grab him, Bert. I don't know about this, Ernie.
Redclaw has a lot of interesting characters in her employ, actually. Waluigi's even back for this episode. While we get a lot of entertaining action and intrigue, the best parts of the story for me are when Bruce talks about Alfred's background.
Underneath Alfred's very proper exterior is a highly resourceful government agent.
Poor Alfred, he must have been petrified.
I doubt it. He was pretty formidable in his day.
I've mentioned before that I'm a big Alfred fan, so anytime he's the focus of an episode, it's usually a good time. This was a bonus since we got to hear about his past as an agent. They've expanded on that idea over the years, and old Alfie even has his own show on Epix and HBO Max. I've never seen it, but if you have, let me know how it is in the comments. Spoilers for the finale. After using Truth Serum, Frederick and much later Alfred give up the codes to the missile. Batman and Robin arrive at Blairquan and fight their way to the control room, but it's too late. Redclaw activates the launch sequence, targeting Trafalgar Square in London. Batman rushes to the Batwing in hopes of taking out the missile in midair, but Redclaw pops out of the back, having hidden inside. His mask is pulled off in the struggle, but Bruce ejects the villain from the plane, landing her in the body of water below. With no mask or top to the cockpit, Bruce catches up to the missile and fires a few of his own just in time. They connect, neutralizing the ballistics missile right in front of Big Ben. The Batman has saved London. At the airport sometime later, we see Alfred and Frederick saying their goodbyes. The latter tries to convince the former to come out of retirement and rejoin the service, but Alfred simply says he's become accustomed to his current style of living and begins the journey back to Gotham. The Lion and the Unicorn has a lot of good stuff in it, and again, I love myself some Alfred, so I'll give it a recommendation. It's not a top-tier episode, but it does have enough unique aspects that I think you should check it out or give it a rewatch. Plus, it's fun to go back and see the last installment they aired that featured this animation and aesthetic style. We'll see you next time on 2022's last installment of Batman.
The Lion and the Unicorn fighting for the crown.
Batman 2022 might be wrapping up, but we aren't escaping this year's coverage without a visit from Mr. Jonah Hex. Showdown begins with Ra's al Ghul and his Society of Shadows breaking into a nursing home called Gotham's Retirement Villas. Batman and Robin step in to stop him, but Ra's escapes with one of the residents and leaves a tape behind for the Dark Knight to listen to. Tracking the Society's whereabouts from the Batmobile, Robin pops in the tape, and the pair listen to Ra's tell a story about why he's taking these specific actions on this night. We flash back to 1883 to follow the building of the Transcontinental Railroad and the arrival of an aging bounty hunter named Jonah Hex. He's looking for a man named Arcady Duvall, who has a $200 bounty on his head for heinous acts back east. A barmaid in the little town of Devil's Hole points Hex in the right direction, which draws him into one of Ra's al Ghul's old schemes. In a remote cave, his organization is building a heavily armed airship to take out the railroad and eventually reach Washington, where Ra's plans to be named Master of America. Duvall is by his side and his second in command. Soon enough, Hex is found spying on the situation and locked up in a cell. However, he soon escapes and chases Duvall onto the rising airship. When the attack on the railroad commences, the bounty hunter interferes and faces off against Duvall on the deck, destruction transpiring all around them. Kevin Altieri directed this century-spanning episode, and interestingly, he was given partial story credit alongside Paul Dini and Bruce Timm. This was the only time in the 19 installments he directed that happened, so I'm assuming Mr. Altieri had some investment in the Jonah Hex character, or maybe the Old West setting. I really like this story, so kudos to him, Dini, and Timm for conceiving an exciting tale such as this. Joe R. Lansdale put everything together in his teleplay, and it's no wonder this is great, because Lansdale also did the teleplays for Read My Lips and my favorite BTAS episode, Perchance to Dream. It was a foregone conclusion that we'd get some kind of Old West-style music in Showdown, and I'm glad composer Todd Hayden didn't disappoint. It's not just the standard Western stuff either. We get some thrilling music throughout the flashback that sold the setting and generally improved the installment. We should talk about the voice actors here. I always shout out the regulars for doing a great job, but for this story, it was all about William Bill McKinney as Jonah Hex.
I ain't no spy. I'm Jonah Hex, and I don't give a tinker's cuss about no railroad. I've come to get you, Arcady Duvall.
McKinney was known for playing characters in westerns, so it was good casting. He embodied the sound of Jonah really well. Malcolm McDowell stopped by to voice Arcady Duvall. There was a menace to that character bubbling beneath the surface that we only saw a touch of in this story, but McDowell definitely made the most of it.
Drastic steps must be taken to preserve the wilderness.
And Ra's al Ghul is the one to do it.
It was a solid, smaller part for the well-known actor. He'd go on to memorably provide the voice for John Corbin, aka Metallo, in Superman, the animated series. Star of the sitcom Bewitched, Elizabeth Montgomery, was also a part of this cast. She voiced the barmaid who helped Jonah early on.
Way I figure, that glow might some way tie in with the Sky Monster and Duval.
Montgomery died of cancer on May 18, 1995 at 62 years old. This ended up being her last acting role in a popular career. It premiered on September 12th that same year. Finally, Senator Patrick Leahy voices the territorial governor character for a few lines.
Before this great enterprise, envisioned by myself, there was nothing here but wilderness.
This is significant because Leahy has portrayed a character in more than one Batman project. In addition to this, he can be seen in Batman Forever, Batman and Robin, The Dark Knight, The Dark Knight Rises, and Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. What can you say? I guess the guy likes Batman. Spoilers for the rest of the story. Before their battle, Jonah Hex blows a hole in the airship, which causes the hydrogen explosions to spread. The crew abandons ship while Duvall and Hex fight it out on the sinking aircraft. They barely survive as it blows up in a massive fireball across the rocky landscape. Jonah takes Arcadia alive and walks off as the flashback ends. In present day, Batman and Robin confront Ra's as he's boarding a plane with the resident from the nursing home. That resident is then revealed as an elderly Arcadia Duvall, the son of Ra's al Ghul.
He was sentenced to 50 years of hard labor. Of course, no one expected him to live out that sentence.
The Lazarus Pit.
When he was a young man, though even its powers cannot restore him now. The privations he had suffered had left his mind shattered. I had lost track of him until he turned up in that rest home.
You couldn't forget about him.
What father can ever forget his son?
Ra's asks for a reprieve from the Dark Knight. He just wants to be on his way to take care of his son. The respect between these two enemies allows Batman to agree, and he heads off with Robin while Ra's and his men leave Gotham. I love the double twist. It's one of those moments from the series that has stuck with me. Thinking about what else Ra's had up his sleeve that we never found out is fun too.
Did you really think, Detective, that in my 600 years of life I would have sired only one offspring?
David Warner is such a beast. What a perfectly balanced performance. It would have been cool to have done a Lost Children of Ra's al Ghul episode. The idea is so fascinating that over the centuries he could have had different children he eventually outlived while showing us the importance of Talia. This just opens up so many possibilities. What a great pair of reveals. I will say the action on the airship is one of the most spectacular set pieces they ever did on this show. Acknowledgements to the storyboard artists and Dong Yang for the animation. That fight with Hex and Duvall, sword versus knife, was classic stuff. Obviously, I'd suggest to go watch or rewatch this episode. Love the Jonah Hex material, love the Old West setting, and I love the extra lore this adds to Ra's al Ghul's history. It's a great way to end this year's Batman. 78 down, 31 to go. Thanks to everyone out there who has stuck with me thus far on this trip down Batman Lane. 3 years completed. Next year, we finish things up by getting through the last few Season 2 episodes and finally dive into the new Batman adventures. Believe me, I have a lot to say about that redesign, those stories, and how it influenced and expanded the DC animated universe. You won't want to miss it. You can always find me on my personal channel, youtube.com/awesomewalter, or on social media talking more Batman stuff. Remember to come back for our Twilight-Tober Zone marathon that will continue this spooky season, and check back for any future fanscription videos right here on Channel Awesome. I'm Walter Benaziac, and I hope you have a bat-tastic rest of your year.
I'm getting too old for this.